If you're watching this channel, it's because you don't enjoy watching the world squander what Christendom built, but you want to do your part. And chances are you've heard me mention a great means by doing just that. Email made by and for Catholics. Check out fidei.email. That's FIDEI.email. Built for Catholic individuals, families, organizations, and groups. They're private, secure, and of course, they're Catholic. And they're offering 2 months off on your first year for an annual subscription if you enter the coupon code Return to Tradition without spaces. That's the name of this channel, without spaces, at checkout.
All too frequently, I have to report stories about nuns coming under the baleful eye of modernist Rome. The nuns almost always, in this case, are traditional nuns, dedicated to the traditional charisms of their order, the way they had been expressed by nuns throughout the ages, until the aftermath of Vatican II, when nuns were expected to start wearing pantsuits and other modern attire, to leave their habits behind, and to go out and make a mess of things in the world. This is especially true of contemplative nuns. Rome has, for decades, shown a sort of contempt for contemplative nuns, and it's been really on full display under Francis, but frankly his predecessors have done it too, just not with as much vim and vigor. So today, we have another story like this. But this story comes with a twist. Because while at the heart of the story is, like every other story about this, the twin heads of tradition and real estate, this story took a different twist. The nuns embraced Sedevacantism. Rome drove them to Sedevacantism. Let's go over the story to give you an idea how weird this is. 2 years ago, almost to the day that I'm posting this video, we get this headline from Alatea. Poor Clares bring life back to an abandoned monastery in northern Spain. The centuries-old convent closed 18 years ago due to a lack of vocations. But today the Poor Clares sisters are back. Look, Alatea is about as mainstream of a Catholic news site as you're ever going to find. They rightfully celebrated the story of a convent being brought back to life by traditional nuns. And yes, they are traditional, as you'll find out in the main story for the day, but here's a bit of context for you from this, because they had quite the impact on the community when they reestablished this monastery. Quote, "In these times when convents are being closed, divine providence is at work. The 13th century convent of Santa Clara in the Biscayan town of Orduna in northern Spain closed 18 years ago due to a lack of vocations. Today, the Poor Clare sisters are back. The community consists of 5 young sisters and one who is 99 years old, all of whom came from the monastery of Belorado in nearby Burgos. The history of this monastery dates back to 1296. Generations succeeded one after another until, in 2003, with only 9 sisters remaining, they moved to the monastery of San Antonio de Vitoria, thus closing the Orduña convent until October 2020, when the new community members arrived. Sister Miriam, one of the Poor Clares of the community, tells Alatea, "We found the monastery in good condition. A man from Orduña was in charge of visiting it, doing some sweeping, checking the roof tiles. There are areas of the monastery that were in good enough condition to live in, and others where the guys see that there are things to rebuild. The way the local people have welcomed them has been amazing," Sister Miriam tells us. "It's a town with deep religious spirit and a great love for the nuns of St. Clare, who have been present in the town for 422 years. The whole town has given its time and affection so that this community of Poor Clares could return and fill their hearts. Having a contemplative convent in Orduña is a gift for the whole local community." End quote. The locals loved them. If you keep reading that article, you'll find that the sisters revived local traditions tied to the convent, including making sweets to sell to the locals, local cultural favorites, as well as donuts and a few other things. If you don't know this, religious are required to essentially support their own monasteries. It's why monks and nuns, even the most contemplative groups, you'll be able to typically you'll find like a store of some kind there where the sisters or the brothers will have goods to sell to the outside world. If you have a monastery or convent near you, I recommend checking for their store if you can, if they have one, and supporting them. That's how they pay their bills. Canon law requires that they do work like this. And these nuns did so by making sweets, confections, that sort of thing. Young people came from hundreds of miles around to help restore the convent. The tiny community of sisters showed all the signs of life that things were going well. And now we fast forward 2 years. Headline from Bilbarohiria: The Scandal of the Excommunicated Bishop and the Poor Clare Nuns. The nuns found themselves in, you guessed it, a real estate dispute with the bishop and, yes, with Rome, because, of course, they did. That's how this always works. The convent that they hold, it turns out, is very valuable. That dispute led to the nuns rejecting their bishop and allying themselves with a bishop from the Thulk line of Sedevacantist bishops. Yes, the nuns embraced Sedevacantism. In 2 years, they went from being a traditional convent allied with the Ecclesia Dei and Cor Orans order in the church to embracing Sedevacantism. I guess they just skipped over that whole independent priests reaching out to Exsurge Domine in Europe or the SSPX or any of the other ways, alternatives that they could have had that would have still had them in communion with Rome, at least with contemporary Rome. But instead, they just went straight to Sedevacantism. It's a very curious story. And their new bishop is quite the character from the sounds of it. See, the article takes a derisive tone when they describe the bishop. It's clearly an attempt to undermine his authority and his credibility, which this outlet would never get away with doing, except this is a Sedevacantist bishop, so of course they'll get away with doing it, because no alternative hypotheses about the state of the church and the state of the crisis in the church will ever be permitted. At every turn, they will denigrate them. And I say that as someone who is not a Sedevacantist. I have nothing against Sedevacantists. I just don't agree with the final analysis of Sedevacantism, that the See of Peter has been vacant for 65 years. I can't see how that works. But as far as I can tell, his holy orders are valid, the bishops here. Though among Sedevacantists, the Thulk line of bishops is something that they highly debate about the legitimacy of. I have no opinion one way or the other about that, since I'm not a Sedevacantist. I'm not even sure about the nature of that debate. But it's worth noting that here, because you'll see the news article doesn't hide the disdain for the author for the bishop. So, from that article, quote, Imperial Duke, Prince Elector of the Holy Roman Empire, and 5 times Grandee of Spain. This is how Pablo de Rojas Sanchez Franco presents himself. The schismatic bishop, excommunicated in 2019, who has established himself as the Pope of the Poor Clares of Bellarado. These nuns, risking excommunication, have plunged into an economic trend that has taken many by surprise. Although not to all, since in April the church had opened a file against the nuns. The nuns did not open their doors to the representative of the bishopric, nor the faithful who came to the convent for a private mass, according to images published by the convent. Pablo de Rojas Sanchez Franco founded the Pious Union of San Pablo Apostol, an organization that is considered a, quote, kind of warrior militia, predestined to excel above everything that exists, according to expert Luis Santamaria del Rio in his book Just Outside the Cross, Groups of Christian Origin in Spain. The Pious Union proclaims itself as the true Church of Christ, and its leader always presents himself as, quote, Catholic, Apostolic, and Roman bishop. Sister Isabel de la Trinidad, the abbess of the Poor Clare community of Bellarado Orduña, has been in her position for decades. Her mandate was to expire on May 29th, but the Diocese of Burgos rules out that this fact is related to her decision to abandon the Catholic Church and declare the popes after Pius XII heretics. For a month, Sister Isabel had avoided personal meetings with Bishop Iseta or his representatives. The meetings were held through the convent's turnstile. Some think that the nun could have passed away. Not even today did she attend to the Archbishop of Burgos, who spoke with the vicar, who confirmed the community's unanimous decision to separate from Rome. Behind this schism, there is an important economic component: the frustrated sale and purchase of the Orduña convent. This building was abandoned in 2002, and in 2020, the Poor Clares of Bellarado agreed to buy it for 1.2 million euros. They contributed 100,000 euros and set semi-annual payments of 75,000 euros, but they never paid. The non-payment led to the contract being terminated, but the nuns did not accept it and sued their congregation sisters. In March 2024, Sister Isabel stated that she had a benefactor willing to buy the monastery and resell it to the nuns of Bellarado, financed by the sale of another monastery in Dario. Given suspicions about the benefactor, the Bishop of Vitoria and his vicar tried to speak with the abbess, who refused to receive them. The nuns said they did not know the name of the buyer. On May 7th, the Bellarado community was summoned before a notary to terminate the purchase and sale contract. Sister Isabel and other nuns claimed 1.6 million euros for works and damages. Not accepting the termination, they took the matter to court. The vicar of the diocese received a WhatsApp message from the nuns' decision to leave the Catholic Church. This religious real estate scandal has taken many by surprise and reflects a complex conflict that mixes economic, religious, and personal elements, showing the tumultuous reality of some religious communities. End quote. There's some details that they left out there that are important, but kind of make their way into a different article that they published. We'll get to that in a second. To review, the nuns had a rich benefactor who was going to buy the monastery, square the debts that it had, and then sell it back to the nuns for basically pennies on the dollar, so they could legally own their own convent. That's when the bishop intervened. They had suspicions of some kind about this benefactor because of his previous purchase of a monastery. They never tell you why he was suspicious. And it's basic thing about journalism here for the author, if you somehow see this, if you're going to say that that somebody in this was suspicious, you should tell us why. What was suspicious about him? Is it suspicious that there's somebody out there buying up convents? If you're suspicious about that, you should be suspicious about Rome and a whole lot of bishops, including some American bishops who do this. But those bishops who do this tend to sell those convents to secular buyers who turn them into all sorts of monstrosities. At least in this case, he was trying to turn this monastery back into the hands of nuns who would keep it for its intended purpose. That having been said, this all came to a head. Headline from the same outlet, "The Poor Clare Nuns Leave the Church of Rome." Look, that's a sensationalist headline, it really is. Sedevacantists will tell you that they are in the Church of Rome, and that most of the rest of us aren't in the Church of Rome, frankly. That's what many of them will say. Sedevacantism isn't the neat cut and dry issue of schism that their detractors, who make it their mission to denigrate them, try to paint it to be. Is it schismatic? Perhaps, though they don't set up their own alternative hierarchy with territorial claims, so claims of being in schism are dubious at best. They would probably respond to that accusation of, are we in schism? Well, in schism from what? Modernist Rome? I mean, most people watching this video would probably admit to being in schism from apostate modernist Rome, who clearly doesn't have the faith today. But Sedevacantists certainly don't recognize the authority of the Pachamama devotees in Rome either, nor their predecessors or their likely successors. The issue is dicey, to say the least. But what drove them to Sedevacantism? What drove the nuns to this? Rome refused to let the nuns sell the property to their benefactor. This is where it gets even weirder. Quote, "The Poor Clares of Bellarado and Orduña in Burgos decided to break with the conciliar church after denouncing a persecution that, according to them, has hindered their community. They claim to be blocked by Rome, which refuses to grant them the license to sell the Dario convent and intends to appropriate its properties." Pause here for a second. Does that sound familiar? It took them like 2 or 3 articles to get to that. Rome is going to appropriate the properties for themselves. We have seen this time and time again. This is what they do. They go after nuns, and whenever they look like they're about to get some autonomy, they drop the Cor Orans hammer on them. Cor Orans was a document published in, I think it was 2018, that fundamentally changed how religious are governed. And one of the effects Cor Orans had on the church was that suddenly you had groups of Poor Clares, in this example, who were very modernist, very, very modernist, out, the pantsuits, the social justice messaging, all that, being in the same governing structure as Poor Clares like this group, and actually having authority over them in many cases. That's what you had here. And Rome intervened. And they were going to appropriate their properties like they have done so many other times. What happens when they appropriate the properties? They sell them to some secular person who will turn them into a restaurant or a nightclub or a museum or something that generates profit. And Rome gets the money, usually splitting it with the local bishop. That's what happens. Let's go back to this. Quote, "This conflict has led the nuns to announce their disassociation from the conciliar church, as reported by the Diario de Burgos. In a statement signed by the Mother Abbess Sister Isabel de la Trinidad, the nuns belonging to the Order of Poor Sisters of St. Clare expressed their frustration. They accuse Rome of withholding the sales license for the Dario convent, a document that, according to them, will probably remain in the office of Mario Iceta and the president until the end of time. In addition, they denounced that Rome prevents them from complying with the payments to the monastery of Orduña, and that it terminated the purchase and sale contract without prior notice after 3 years. End quote. The sale that was going to save this convent was terminated by Rome with the local authorities with no notice to the nuns. How's that for synodality? Rome was behind this. That's why this happened. And so this, honestly, this was inevitably going to happen, where some nuns out there were going to be, in their desperation, turned to Sedevacantism. That was going to happen. This has happened so many times already that Rome has been responsible for financial reasons and ideological reasons, their hatred against sacred tradition, that they tried to crush nuns, traditional nuns, that they've already driven many of them to getting support from independent priests. Priests who aren't strictly speaking Sedevacantists, but who are associated with independent bishops and things, who are clearly outside the normal structures of the Catholic Church. This was going to happen at some point, and it finally did. Rome, Paca Papa Francis, drove them into the arms of Sedevacantism. Well done, Francis. Well done. Please pray for these nuns. Keep them in your prayers, please, and for the bishop and everybody else in this story. Let me know what you think of this, though, in the hot comments. Are you surprised that it took this long after 11 years now of this, that we've seen them finally, at least one group finally driven to Sedevacantism? There are other monasteries that associated themselves with the SSPX, who are clearly not Sedevacantists, and other independent groups. So it was only a matter of time in my mind. But do you agree with that? Let me know what you think about this in the comments, please. And like and subscribe if you haven't, it does help. So to sharing this on social media, that helps too. And as always, pray for the church. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.